Welcome to the West Business Development Center. My name is Kelly Geiser, and I'm the event coordinator here at West, hosting today's webinar, Hiring Your First Employee. West is a nonprofit funded by the Federal Small Business Administration Agency program. We are both a women's business center and a small business development center for Mendocino and Lake County. Through federal and state agencies matched with local community contributions, it is your tax dollars that allow us to provide our services to you for free. These services include one-on-one counseling, webinars, loan package readiness, and advising to small business owners and entrepreneurs at every stage of business development. We also have a pool of expert advisors that cover niche business needs from permitting to HR and e-commerce. If you'd like to learn more about becoming a West client, please visit our website or give our office a call. Just a quick disclaimer that today's webinar is for educational and informational purposes only. And without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce today's instructor, Lisa McCormack, who will present today's webinar, Hiring Your First Employee.
Okay, thank you very much for that intro. Let me go back here, a screen. Thank you, Kelly. Hi, everyone. Thanks for taking your lunch hour to attend our presentation today. So as an advisor at West, the most common topic I advise on is this one. I need to hire an employee and I don't know how. And I'm scared. So there's a lot to know about hiring your first employee, especially in California. And today I'm going to break it down for you and help you be able to hire with confidence. So here's what we will be doing today in our hour together. I will provide some background on what is an employee and how does the employee classification differ from other worker types. We will then look at 5 decisions you'll need to make before hiring an employee and the steps that go into those decisions. And then I'll give you some options on the best way to pay your employees, whether you do that by setting up your own payroll or using a third party to handle your payroll. And finally, I'll share some important resources that you'll need to know about, and then we can open it up for questions. So Kelly's going to help me out here, and if I'm talking too much and not leaving enough time in the end, she will ping me on that. I have a lot of slides, and so I'll go through it pretty quickly, but hopefully we'll get through everything with enough time. So before we talk about employees, let's review why this topic is so popular right now. You've all probably heard about AB5, which makes it much more difficult to hire workers as independent contractors. But as some of you that have attended my other webinars know, that even before AB5 passed, employers were already misclassifying workers as contractors. So AB5, which is Assembly Bill 5, requires more workers to be classified as employees. It makes use of what's called the ABC test, which was codified by AB5, which is a much more stringent test for classifying independent contractors. There's some version of this test is also used by the U.S. Department of Labor and a lot of other states. So it's not so unusual, but it was really represented a big change to classifying independent contractors. And while AB5 has had a couple of revisions and there are exceptions to the ABC test for some worker types, it still requires you to use the common law test that was in place before AB5, and it's still difficult to actually have somebody meet that test. So it's risky. It's not impossible to hire a contractor. If you need help with that, reach out to me and to Wes. But it's never risky to make a worker an employee as long as you understand your obligations. And that's what we're going to cover today. So won't be spending any more time talking about contractors because it's a whole topic in itself. So moving along, so we know we want to hire an employee, not another type of worker. So let's make sure we know what is an employee. And I'm going to assume that in this scenario, you know who you want to hire and pretty good idea of what you'd like to pay them, or what the position looks like, what you can afford to pay. So we're not going to talk about finding an employee. We're going to talk about actually hiring somebody as an employee. And then I'll walk you through the steps to make that happen. So this graphic shows the different categories of work relationships, the schedules and the pay types. Some of these combinations don't work. You don't pay volunteers, for example, but basically this is the structure of the category of workers. And, I find that many clients mistakenly think that that all workers are employees. But as you can see, workers come in many different flavors, contractors, interns, volunteers. Today, we're just going to talk about employees, which is why that's in big letters. So let's look at the categories of employees. So with employees, you have three basic decisions that you have to make, whether you hire somebody as a regular or temporary employee, what their schedule looks like, part-time, full-time, or flexible schedules. And I'll talk about all of these things. And then how you pay them, whether you can pay them on a salary or an hourly wage or piece rate or commission or project work. So we have a narrow set of decisions now to make now that we know we're hiring an employee. So what is an employee? So an employee is someone you hire on a regular or a temporary basis, and they are hired to provide services to your company on a regular basis in exchange for compensation. And they do not provide these services as part of an independent business. An employee's activities are controlled and directed by you, the employer, and are defined under the Fair Labor Standards Act. And these are persons whose activities are controlled and directed and that are working primarily for the employer's benefit. And finally, most U.S. employment relationships are at will, and I'm sure you're all familiar with this concept. California is an at-will state, so the relationship can be terminated at any time with or without cause and with or without notice by either the employer or the employee. And most states are at will in the United States, with the exception of, I think, Montana is the only one that isn't at will. So let's talk about decision number one, the relationship. Is this going to be a regular employee or a temporary employee? And what's the difference? So regular employees are hired for an indefinite period of time. So this is where you really need to think about, I'm bringing on this employee. I hope that they're going to stay for the duration, right? It's not a temporary project. It's not a testing out period. You are planning to hire this regular employee for the long run. Temporary employees are hired on a temporary basis, either for a project, the length of the project, or maybe to fill in for somebody that is on leave, or that if you have some temporary increase in your workload. And while there's no definitive period of time you can keep somebody as a temporary employee, generally legal counsel will say, don't keep somebody in a temporary status more than 6 months. And the reason around this is that the longer you keep somebody as a temporary, the more you run the risk of that individual looking and feeling like a regular employee, and they would most likely not be receiving some of the benefits that a regular employee gets. And we'll talk about that shortly. The second decision is this going to be a full-time or a part-time, or even an employee that has flexible hours? So there's no single definition of part-time versus full-time, but 30 hours a week is becoming the standard for full-time. This aligns well with, if you are an employer with over 50 full-time employees, you have to provide health benefits, and 30 hours a week is the eligibility for employees under the ACA to get health benefits. So it's If you're under 50, you could have a different number for that, but generally, 30 to 40 hours is considered full-time. And usually full-time employees are eligible for all the benefits that you may choose to provide. There are some required mandatory benefits that you must provide, but these are things like, vacation time off pay, and health insurance benefits. Part-time employees generally work less than 30 hours a week and may only receive those mandatory benefits that I talked about and that I'll show you in a couple of slides. And work schedule can be as needed or flexible, if that makes sense for your business and the employee. So this is another misnomer that, if I have an employee, they have to be on a fixed schedule. They have to work a certain number of hours a week. That is not the case. You can have an employee that only works, 1 day a week or 2 days a month. As long as you are paying them properly, then they do not need to be on a fixed schedule. So I think that's a little bit of a misnomer that confuses employers. The third decision is around pay. So you can pay some employees on a salary, which is a fixed compensation paid for regular services. You can pay employees a wage, and that can be an hourly, daily, or a piecework basis, which is a set rate per unit of work. You can pay employee on a commission basis, and this is usually a fee that is paid, that is a percentage of business, or most of you would be familiar with sales commissions, where a salesperson will receive some percentage of the revenue received from the sale. And then there's project pay. So this is a flat sum for a day, week, or a month's worth of work for doing a particular job. And project pay is pretty uncommon. At the end of the day, the company still needs to track time and pay minimum wage and overtime if eligible. But an example of project pay might be a yoga studio has yoga instructors that are part-time, and you might determine that you want to pay them by the class per class, and this is fine, but what you pay them per class must be at least equivalent to minimum wage for the time worked, including any time to prep or break down. So you just have to come up with that number to ensure that the minimum wage, at least the minimum wage, is being met if you decide to use project pay. But it is pretty uncommon. Hourly pay. So any employee may be paid hourly pay for actual hours worked. Most employees who are paid hourly are eligible for overtime pay. And minimum wage rates are set at the federal, state, and the city level. Employees must be paid the minimum wage for the city in which they work, right? So this is another important thing that often gets overlooked. So if an employee works more than 2 hours in a city outside of their regular work location, they must be paid that minimum wage if that wage is higher. So, here in California, our minimum wage as of January 1st of this year is $14 for employers that have less than 26 employees. And I'm getting a little blank here, and $15 for over 26 employees. And this is going up to $15 for everyone in 2023. And I'm also hearing that number may actually be higher. Many cities in California have their own minimum wage. So for example, Santa Rosa is $15.85 an hour for no matter how many employees you have. San Francisco is $16.32. San Jose is $16.20. Mendocino does not have its own minimum wage, so the state wage applies. But if you are an employer where you're sending your workers outside of the county, you need to understand if you have obligations to pay a higher minimum wage if they work more than 2 hours in that location. Salary. So any employee can be paid a weekly or a monthly salary. Something important to know is that a salary cannot be reduced due to quality or quantity of work. So when you're paying somebody on a salary, you're paying them to to get the job done. Basically, you're paying them for the job as it's outlined in the job description. So there may be times where they're working more than 40 hours a week or less than 40 hours a week. It's not tied to hours. So you also cannot reduce the pay. To be exempt from overtime pay, an employee the position must meet an exemption test under the Federal Fair Labor Standards Act. You must pay a minimum federal salary of $684 a week. But more importantly, in California, you must meet the state exemption test, which is a higher standard than the federal. In California, an employee must be paid the state minimum salary of $1,120 or $1,200 a week, depending on how many employees you have. And again, that's going up. And basically, this is 2 times the state's minimum wage. So if you're thinking about whether you want to pay somebody on a salary, before you even get to looking at the exemption tests, you should just do that calculation. Can I pay this person 2 times, the state minimum wage? And if you can't, then you may as well not even go any further. But if you can, or the salary is higher, you still need to spend some time understanding whether the position can be exempt from overtime. So let's just talk about exempt versus non-exempt. So exempt employees, they have to meet one of the exemption tests, and they're typically paid on a fixed salary, and they don't receive overtime. And as I said, in California, the standard is higher. Non-exempt employees do not meet one of these tests, and they're typically paid on an hourly wage that is covered by wage and hour laws regarding minimum wage, overtime, meals and rest periods, and some other things. So the exempt, non-exempt is a full topic on its own. It's important that you appreciate that there are rules and considerations around this. Again, happy to help anybody that is looking to make this determination, and we won't have time to spend today on that, but happy to help navigate that for you as well. And also with non-exempt employees, sorry, I missed these 2 points, you must track hours on a timesheet, either on paper or electronically, and you must retain those records, as well as providing breaks and meal periods. Other types of pay, as I mentioned earlier, generally employees that are paid on a piece rate or commission or project basis must still meet minimum pay requirements, and there are other compliance requirements to know of as well. So employees and expenses. Employees must be paid for work-related expenses such as mileage, phone, internet service, and travel. Generally, the employer must provide the equipment and tools that the employee needs to do their job. And these are reimbursable expenses, not earnings. So when COVID showed up, when the pandemic showed up, and a lot of businesses were able to have their employees work from home, a lot of businesses were surprised to learn that they needed to provide reimbursement, or a reasonable reimbursement, towards cell phone and internet, because employees were going home, and at a minimum using their cell phone. Sometimes they would be able to take home a computer, but they still were using their home internet for part of their job. So this is important to recognize. Unlike a contractor that supplies all their own equipment, and you don't have to pay for travel, etc., you will have expenses that need to be factored in and reimbursed if you have employees. Decision number 4 is around benefits. So what are required employee benefits? and we'll talk about this in the next slide, but there's certain things you're not required to offer, like paid time off, vacation, holiday pay, health benefits if you're under 50 full-time employees. But there are other things that you are required to do. So you need to have workers' compensation insurance for your employees. You need to pay into UI unemployment insurance. And these are what we call employer taxes. You need to pay into Social Security and Medicare. You, in California and in other jurisdictions, you need to provide paid sick leave. And I'll talk a little bit about that just so in case you don't know what that is. So employees who work at least 30 days a year are eligible to receive California paid sick leave. Employees can begin using accrued sick leave once they have worked for an employer for 90 days. A few specific type of employees are not eligible to receive sick pay, including employees that are covered by collective bargaining agreements and some other industries like air carriers and in-home support services programs. The way this leave accrues is employees will accrue 1 hour of paid sick leave for every 30 hours worked. And paid sick leave must carry over from year to year, but employers can place a cap on the accrual of 48 hours or 6 days. Employers can limit the employee's use of sick leave to 24 hours or 3 days per year. And you can do this on an accrual basis or a lump sum basis. So some employers don't want to have to deal with the hassle of the accrual process, the administrative hassle of that. So you could make the 3 days of sick pay available to each employee at the beginning of each year. And the final thing about sick pay, and this could be another webinar also, is that if you do offer a generous paid time off policy, like a PTO policy, you will not have to offer the California paid sick leave as a separate benefit. And that's a whole nother topic that we can discuss as well. Back to other required benefits, state disability insurance is part of the overall tax process when you have someone on payroll that is employee funded in California. And if you have 5 or more employees, you need to offer some type of retirement savings plan in California. And this compliance needs to be done by the end of this month, June 30th. The good news is that if you're required, if you have to meet this requirement, you just need to put a plan in place that allows employees to contribute to a retirement plan. You are not responsible for making a contribution as an employer. And I put a link in here that you'll get in the slides to California's CalSaver program. It's a great program that requires very little administration. Employees get directed to a site. They can make a contribution, which is a post-tax contribution to a Roth IRA. So this is a really good option if you are not ready to put in a 401k or a simple IRA or some other type of retirement plan. There are other job protected leaves in California and also in Massachusetts and New York that you would have to comply with as well. Things in California like pregnancy disability leave. And if you're over 5 employees, the California Family Rights Act, which is California's version of the Family Medical Leave Act. There are requirements there as well.
Really quick, Lisa, on the last
Yes.
slide, there was
Yes.
a question asking, can you elaborate on what you mean generous PTO? Is that unlimited PTO?
No, that's not unlimited PTO. The PTO needs to provide the same amount in the same time frame as the California sick time. So for example, if you gave 3 weeks of PTO, 15 days, that would in most cases be sufficient to not offer the sick time. And I can provide an additional link to that later in the presentation that explains how you calculate that. But it is not unlimited. No, it is much less than that. But that's about the lowest threshold, I think, is about 15 days. But there are other complications around this as well, because that would be for full-time employees. If you have part-time employees, that will not work, because if you prorate your paid time off benefit, it may not meet that requirement of not offering the sick time. So many clients that I deal with, they offer the PTO to full-time employees, and then part-time employees, they offer prorated PTO, but then they still offer the separate California sick leave on an accrual basis, so that it's covered. So this is a little bit of a complicated topic. If we have time at the end, I'll shoot a link in the chat that will get into more detail about that. Any other questions at this point, Kelly?
No, that was
Okay,
the only one.
great, good question. Okay, so what are optional employee benefits? Things like PTO and vacation. Again, so a lot of employers get confused that this isn't something that they have to do. Holiday pay is also optional. But with that said, these are the kind of benefits that employees are going to be expecting from their employer, right? So it will certainly help you attract and retain if you can offer some of these additional paid time off benefits, and they are very important, even more important today, I think, to the younger generation of workers who really value time off. Medical, dental insurance, health insurance is optional unless you are under 50 full-time employees. Okay, I think that's the last bullet there. Okay, so let's move on to decision number 5. So this is about how you decide to pay your employees. So you can hire an employee on your own payroll, or you can hire your employees through a third party in a co-employment relationship, which I will get into in the next following slides. But before I do, let's just get an idea of how much it costs to have an employee. So hopefully you can read this. This is an example of somebody that you would be paying a $52 an hour rate. And this is from a spreadsheet where we built in these formulas, but basically FICA is a fixed amount. It's capped, but it has a pretty high cap. Unemployment is fixed with a pretty low cap. Workers' comp is highly variable, right? So your workers' comp, I think in this example, we used a pretty low workers' comp rate. But if you are in an industry that is kind of a higher risk industry, and you have jobs that have higher risk for injury, you will pay a higher premium for your workers' comp premium. So, for example, if you have all office workers and it's a low hazard area and they're mostly doing administrative clerical work, you will have one rate. If you have employees that have to travel for their job, right, get in the car and drive, you'll have a different rate. If you have a business where you've got your cleaning windows and you've got workers who are getting on ladders, and then you're going to have an even higher rate. So it's very, very variable. So in this example, I think we put in what would be kind of an average rate. You will also have to factor in the allowance for the 24 hours of paid sick leave. And that is all that is really required. So in this example, if you didn't offer any benefits, you just have to do the workers' comp and the California paid sick leave, you would be looking at, a cost of $59.40, which is about 14%. And that's without offering any benefits. If you were to offer benefits in the next example, we factored in some costs for health insurance. In this example, I think it's about $1,000 a month for the employee, assuming this is a full-time employee. We put in some PTO. We put in some paid holidays as well. And that comes to about 35%, right? So it's a 35% on top of the pay rate, what you're paying the employee. And this is really ranges depending on what you do. It could be less than that. It could be more than that, depending on how generous your time is. But you can think about it being about with some type of benefits, maybe just pay time off. It would be, between 25 and 30%. Okay, so now let's talk about actually the physical part of paying your employees. So, most employers will not try to do payroll themselves unless you're very much an expert at that, or you have an accountant that really knows what they're doing. Because if you try to do the payroll yourself, you have to be responsible for making all the calculations, for remitting your taxes, for paying on a timely basis, and it's not something that we would recommend. We would recommend using a payroll provider, and also if you have an accountant, which hopefully you do, they can help you with this. They can help you choose the payroll, they can help you set up the payroll, and in some cases they'll even run the payroll for you. They might use QuickBooks, which is a very common accounting platform, or another service. So some of the payroll providers, so one is yourself, which I already said, we don't recommend you actually doing this unless you're really, really good at it. Or you can pick a firm. Some of the smaller firms like QuickBooks, Gusto, PrimePay are pretty cost effective. They have a nice technology platform that not only allows you to onboard your employees, but it allows you to do a lot of other things in managing your employees as part of the process. And then there are the big firms like ADP, Paychex, Paylocity. They all pretty much do the same thing. They just do it slightly different. They might have a slightly different service model. My firm uses Gusto, and it works very, very well for us. It's easy to use. We have 4 or 5 employees, and I've recommended this to a number of clients as well. I would say the majority of the clients that I work with through West are using QuickBooks for payroll and are happy with that as well. And you will have responsibilities as the employer, for adding new employees to the payroll, reporting their hours, but the payroll service will do all of the required reporting. They'll remit the taxes, and that is very much worth the price of what you pay. And I'll talk about the price differences in a later slide on this as well. You can decide to outsource your payroll, not just your payroll, but your payroll, HR payroll and benefits to a third-party organization. One that we'll talk about today is a PEO, professional employer organization. And with a PEO, they are the employer of record, so their name is on the paycheck. You provide the work direction. They don't really care about that part of it. But it is considered a co-employment relationship between your company and the PEO. So you are joining the PEO along with a lot of other businesses, right? And so the PEO is an employer. So they're a very large employer. And as a result of being a large employer, they can provide you with things like kind of large company benefits, even if you're a small company. So there are some definite advantages to being in a co-employment relationship. They take care of the workers' comp, all the payroll and the benefits. They also provide some basic HR support and tools, which can be very, very helpful. You still have to do some things, but you have usually an assigned HR manager or contact that can help you with anything related to the employment process, hiring, terminating, and everything in between. You typically select the benefits program you want to offer. They usually work with a lot of the very large carriers, um, like Aetna and Blue Cross and others. um, and you typically pay a per employee per month fee plus the actual cost of the salary, taxes, and the benefits that you offer. And I'll talk about how much that PEPM is. And a PEO makes sense if you employ all of your workers in the US. It also makes sense if you're hiring employees all over the country. It's just a really good way to have a single platform and a single benefits package that meets the needs of across 50 states. And you should consider this if you really are looking at going into a long-term relationship with an outsourced organization like a PEO. It's not something to consider on the short term because it's quite an investment to get started. But this is a common direction for startup companies that get funded and they need to hire a lot of employees all over the place. This is a great way for them to start until they get big enough where they can hire an internal staff to handle a lot of these things. And it gets pretty expensive once you get past a certain point on a PEO model. There's also what's called an employer of record payrolling company. And I've talked about this in some of my other webinars with West. They are similar to a PEO, or even like a temp agency, right? They are the employer of record. Their name is on the paycheck. You provide the work direction. It is also a co-employment relationship like a PEO. And they will also provide benefits, workers' comp. They typically provide a basic ACI compliant benefits plan. So that's all included in the markup, which is about 20%. It can be higher than that. You typically have no visibility into the benefits offering. You don't select anything. It is just available to the employees that you put on put with the payrolling company. And as I said, 20%. Payrolling company may employ only some of your employees. It works well if you have somebody in another state you don't want to register, or you have a special short-term need. So when we started our company, Affogato HR Consulting, we had purchased the business from our prior employer. And with that came an employee that was involved with a lot of the clients that we were purchasing. So we needed to hire an employee. So myself and my business partner, we were just not ready to set up payroll. Even though we're HR people and we know how to do this, we just had too much going on. We were hitting the ground running. We had like 60 clients. So we decided to put this one employee that we were bringing over on an employer record payrolling service. It worked really well because she needed benefits. She needed a 401k. She needed things that we were just not ready to offer. But we needed to offer them to her because she had them and we needed her. So we were able to do that through a payrolling company, and we paid 20%. We just got an invoice for 20%, and they took care of everything else. She had the opportunity to buy up on benefits. She got a basic plan, but she could buy up, which she did. So it gave us the ability to offer things that we could not offer, and we felt it was worth that markup. But again, this isn't something that you would do for all of your employees. This is something that you should really do on a temporary basis. Okay, so now let's just recap the decisions that you have to make when you are deciding to hire an employee. You need to determine if they're going to be regular or temporary. What's their schedule going to look like? How are you going to pay them? What kind of benefits do you need? Would you consider offering, and are you required to offer? And then whether you hire the employee on your own or use a third-party co-employment arrangement. All right, I'm going to take a breath. All right, so what is the right payroll decision for you?
Really quick, Lisa.
Yes.
There was a question on Under recap, someone asked, do accountants in California need a license?
Well, not necessarily, unless they are going to be your CPA, then they do need to be a licensed CPA, and that's if they're doing your taxes. But if they are just doing bookkeeping, they don't, as far as I know, they don't, there's no licensing requirement. They need to, of course, be a business, and just like any small business. But bookkeepers, sometimes they have certifications and things like QuickBooks, but if they're not doing your taxes, they do not, accountant bookkeepers, as far as I know, are not required to have a license.
Great, thank you. And we're at the 12:40 mark.
Okay, perfect. All right. So what's the right payroll decision for you? Setting up your own payroll using Augusto or QuickBooks is a great way to go when you are not going to offer benefits, and when you can handle the compliance and administration requirements on your own, and when your technology needs are limited. You might want to consider a PEO when you're hiring more employees in multiple states, when you really want to outsource and you need to offer benefits and you want to outsource HR payroll and benefits, when you want a strong technology, all-in-one technology infrastructure, and when you're looking at a long-term relationship. And then finally, using a payrolling service, employer record service, when you want to offer basic benefits and you want somebody to handle all of the compliance, taxes, and maybe when you need to hire 1 or 2 employees or you have some other short-term need. So cost comparison, on your own payroll, you're going to pay about the 14% for taxes and mandatory benefits, about $70 a month for payroll costs. That really may be a little bit high. Typically, Gusto and some of the other smaller ones charge about $40 a month plus some per employee amount, like $8. So you pay more the more employees that you have. A PEO is quite more expensive. You pay the same taxes, and then you pay an administrative fee of $80 to $200 a month for all of those services that they offer. They usually have a monthly minimum between $1,000 and $2,000 a month, plus you're paying for the cost of your insurance and workers' comp. And then the payrolling service is, as I said, it's a straight markup of somewhere between 20 and probably 25%, depending on who you use. So to prepare for hiring any employees, you need to have a federal ID number, which most of you should have if you're running any kind of business. And then you need to register in the state where you have employees. In California, you need to register with the EDD and get a payroll account. You need to become familiar with the state's wage and hour requirements. Select a payroll provider, figure out what your pay periods and pay frequency will be, obtain workers' comp insurance before you can even start paying someone. A lot of these payroll providers also offer workers' comp. Gusto does, for example. They have a partner. I get my workers' comp through them. Same with Intuit QuickBooks. You may have other insurance that you need to get. You need to make decisions on paid time off and whether you're going to offer any kind of benefits. And you need to have some type of offer letter that you can use to hire your employees and understand what is required in terms of new hire paperwork. And so for your first hire, you're going to evaluate the job responsibilities and pay, make an offer, get it accepted. Consider whether you want to conduct background checks. That is not required, it is optional, but it is best practice to at least do some type of background checks, even if it's just a county criminal check. Provide required new hire material. You are probably all familiar with the I-9, which is the immigration form that needs to be completed by the end of the first day on the job. You'll enter the employee into the payroll system, make sure they understand the timekeeping requirements for your company. And then in California, these are the required the required forms that you need to give a new hire. You will have, these all have links. So when you get the PowerPoint, you'll be able to click on these things. Of course, we're all familiar with W4, the I-9 form, and then the required California pamphlets that you need to get the employees to read and acknowledge. And for non-exempt hourly employees, you're required to do a new employee notice. This is around wage theft protection. And there is a link to that as well. And then you're also required, if you have employees, to post mandatory state and federal postings. This is something that you can purchase through Cal Chamber and other vendors. You can get an all-in-one federal and state poster for about, I don't know, $25. You need to post this in any location where you have employees. You also are technically required, if you have remote employees, to send this to them as well. And I highly recommend looking at Cal Chambers, HR California store. They have good pricing on all of this, as well as other, if you wanted to actually give out hard copies of the required pamphlets, they sell those as well. You must post the appropriate California wage order. I'm going to talk about that in another slide. And you need to have employee files set up, and they need to be set up in a certain way. You need to keep all of your I-9s separate from other employee information. You need to keep your payroll records separate. These employee files can be set up electronically. They don't have to be in paper, but they need to be set up in a specific way. I'm happy to share that information as well. You need to decide on your employment policies and practice, and whether you want to develop an employee handbook, and determine how you're going to manage performance. And if you're over 5 employees in California, you need to provide harassment prevention training to your managers and your employees once every 2 years. Okay, so where am I now? So I'm going to skip through this next slide just very quickly. There's a lot of myths around hiring employees. There's no law that says you have to have an employee handbook, but it's a good practice. But you do need to comply with the employment laws that apply to your size and your state. You don't have to give performance reviews, but it is a good best practice. It's not impossible to end the employment relationship. As we talked about, at will. There's always a way to end an employment relationship. Sometimes it may cost you a little bit, but it's always possible. And things like paid off and benefits, I already talked about, are not required. Okay, so I'm going to give you some links that you can look at on your own. This is a link to register for your FEIN and to register in California for your payroll account. I talked about wage orders. So in California, you are required to comply with a wage order that is appropriate to your industry. And this covers all of the wage and hour information, working conditions, exemptions. This is something that needs to be printed out and posted alongside of your compliance posters. I put a link in here to help you figure out which order applies to you. In some cases, it may be more than one order, and it is required of all employees to post this wage order. Okay, whew. So that is the end of my presentation. So I think we can open it up now to questions, if there are any, Kelly.
Yeah, Lisa asked, she's thinking of hiring an intern to provide therapy services. It seems she has 2 choices for pay, either commission-based, 45% of actual services billed, versus a set hourly rate. What would be a good way to think this through to determine the best course?
Ooh, that's a good one. I could say in my experience, I've never paid an intern on a commission. So I would have to give that some thought. I mean, it's never wrong to pay somebody an hourly rate. And particularly with interns, if they are actually performing work for you, you need to pay them on an hourly rate. On the commission side, you would need to just, ensure that that commission would be at least equivalent to minimum wage, but it sounds like it probably would. I don't know what your numbers are. So that's a tough one. Be happy to walk through that with you separately if you'd like to, because I haven't seen it done.
Great. And Rosalind asks, suggestions where a business should advertise job openings, like Indeed.com.
Yeah, so that is interesting. I mean, I think that Indeed is becoming kind of the job posting board of choice. Indeed is an aggregator, so it's a good place that it allows you to post jobs. It also allows job seekers to see job postings from other job boards, and it's not that expensive. I know a lot of of employers in Mendocino County use Facebook also. They're finding that depending on the level of worker that they're looking at, that Facebook can be a really good place to go. And then of course there are also paid services like LinkedIn. If you're hiring at a professional level, LinkedIn is a great place to get access to professional level people. But I find that Indeed is probably the most common one these days.
Well, great. Thank you, Lisa. Those were all the questions that we got in
Great.
the presentation. If you don't mind moving on to the next slide really quick.
Absolutely.
Thank you. So if you didn't see already, I've launched a short survey. Again, your feedback is really important to bringing Lisa back for all your HR questions and topics in these free webinars. So please do fill it out. Your input is greatly appreciated. Next slide. Just a reminder that today's webinar was hosted by a California Women's Business Center. We are located all over the state for your business advising needs. If we are not local to you, we can also go to the small business development centers all throughout Northern California, and honestly, nationwide. If you are not local to California at the moment, and yes, do seek out a center close to you. And that's all I have. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending. And thank you so much, Lisa. I think this is very informative and a lot of questions to think about before you hire
Well,
your first employee.
Well, thank you for having me. And I know this is a lot of information. I encourage any of you that are, if you're a West client, call and ask to talk to me. If you're getting ready to do this, happy to walk you through all the details and those tough decisions. If you're not a West client, consider becoming a West client, because this kind of information is available to you, and advisors like myself and in other areas can really, really be helpful when you're making decisions about how to grow your business.
Yeah, on that note, West Center, we are funded by federal tax dollars. So the services like that Lisa can provide to you are free. Just you have to sign up and be a client. So, and again, if you have any feedback or any topics that you'd like Lisa to come back for, please write to us at events@westcenter.org. We'll be happy to show her all the enthusiastic feedback to get her back for another webinar topic.
Great. Thanks. Hope to see you all in a future webinar.
Thank you so much, everyone, and thank you, Lisa. Hope to see you
Thank
at the
you.
next webinar. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
everyone.